The crisp autumn air of Evergreen Heights usually brought me a sense of peace, but that particular morning it felt like a cold hand on my heart. Today was Amelia's wedding day, and a $50,000 check, carefully tucked into my inner jacket pocket, felt less like a gift and more like a ticking bomb. My name is Marcus Thorne, and at 58 years old I've built a life, a successful architectural firm, and a comfortable home, all with the hope of providing the best for my daughter Amelia. From the moment she was a little girl twirling in her princess dresses, I imagined this day differently. I imagined it filled with pure joy, not this quiet dread that gnawed at my stomach. I've always been the steady one, the reliable one, the one who fixed things and paid for things. Amelia never really had to worry about money. Her education at the best private schools, her 4 years at a prestigious university in Boston, the down payment on her first apartment in the city, even the sleek new car she drove last year, all came from my hard work, my long hours, my skipped vacations. I did it because I loved her, with a fierce, unwavering paternal love that overlooked her occasional dismissiveness, her growing sense of entitlement. I told myself it was just a phase, the typical youthful self-centeredness that would eventually give way to maturity and gratitude. She was marrying a young man named Brandon, a promising but currently struggling artist. I liked Brandon well enough, or at least I tried to. He seemed charming on the surface, but there was a glint in his eye, a calculating quality that always made me a little uneasy. Still, Amelia was happy, or so she claimed, and I wanted nothing more than her happiness. I had spent months planning this extravagant wedding, sparing no expense. The venue, the flowers, the catering, her custom-made designer gown that cost more than my first car, the open bar, the live band. It was all meticulously arranged to be the fairy tale she had always dreamed of. Every time I questioned a particularly exorbitant choice, Amelia would wave it off with a dismissive hand, saying, "Oh, Daddy, it's my day. You said you wanted me to have the best." And I would sigh, write the check, and remind myself that this was my last major gift to her before she started her own family. I saw it as an investment in her future, a final gesture of my unconditional love and support. I wanted her to feel secure, to have a strong start. But a creeping feeling had started to settle over me in the months leading up to this day, a sense that I was being taken for granted, not just financially, but emotionally. My opinions were dismissed, my advice ignored. I was merely the provider, the wallet. Yet I continued, hoping that one day she would truly see me, truly appreciate the sacrifices I had made. Today, as I adjusted my tie, preparing to walk my only daughter down the aisle, I clung to that sliver of hope, praying that the day would be filled with genuine warmth and love, not just expectation. I knew I had done everything in my power to give her the world, and now it was time to see if any of it had truly mattered. The memory of a conversation I'd overheard just a few weeks ago, a conversation that had sent a chill down my spine, made that hope feel increasingly fragile. The betrayal, when it finally solidified in my mind, wasn't a sudden, dramatic explosion, but a slow, agonizing burn that intensified over weeks, culminating in a single, overheard conversation that shattered my illusions. It was a Tuesday evening, 2 months before the wedding. Amelia and Brandon had come over for dinner, ostensibly to finalize details about the seating chart. I had excused myself to the kitchen to fetch a bottle of vintage wine I'd been saving. As I approached the living room, I heard Amelia's voice, hushed but clear, laced with an unfamiliar cynicism. "Honestly, Brandon, it's $50,000. It's barely a dent in his accounts. He won't even notice it." Brandon chuckled, a low, smooth sound that instantly grated on my nerves. "Your father's a good man, Amelia, very generous, but you're right, it's an investment in our future, not just yours. We can finally get that studio space, maybe even start looking at that gallery lease." Amelia giggled, and it wasn't her usual joyous sound, but something colder, sharper. "Oh, he's generous all right, as long as he feels like he's pulling the strings. Always has to be the great provider. Honestly, sometimes I just want to scream." All his lectures about hard work and responsibility, as if he knows what it's like for us. Once we have the money, we can finally do what we want without his constant advice. He thinks this check is some kind of lifelong obligation. He thinks it'll make me grateful. Fool. My hand froze on the doorknob. The bottle of wine slipped, almost crashing to the floor. My breath caught in my throat. Fool. The word echoed in my mind, twisting a knife in a wound I hadn't even realized was so deep. All those years, all the sacrifices, all the unquestioning love, reduced to a transaction, a means to an end. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, saw me as a fool, a provider to be manipulated, a source of endless funds, but certainly not a person deserving of respect or genuine affection. The pain that flooded me was physical, a crushing weight on my chest. It wasn't just the words, but the callousness in her tone, the casual disregard for everything I had done. It felt like my world, the one built on the foundation of my unwavering love for her, was crumbling around me. For a moment I considered walking in, confronting them, demanding an explanation, but something stopped me. A quiet voice inside, a voice that had been silenced by years of indulgence, whispered, "Wait, observe, understand." I took a deep breath, composed my features, and walked into the living room, a practiced smile plastered on my face. "Ah, here's the wine. A vintage I think you'll both appreciate." Amelia and Brandon instantly straightened, their faces shifting into innocent, welcoming smiles. Their eyes, however, held a quick, almost imperceptible flicker of guilt, quickly masked. They thought they had gotten away with it. They thought I hadn't heard. And in that moment, I decided to play along. I would continue to fund the wedding, to smile, to nod, to act as if nothing was amiss. But inside, a cold, unwavering resolve began to form, like steel hardening in a furnace. The $50,000 check, once a symbol of love, now became something else entirely. It became the leverage, the silent weapon in my hand. I would walk her down the aisle, perform my fatherly duties, but the girl I was doing it for, the loving daughter I believed I had, was gone. And in her place was someone I barely recognized, someone who saw me only as a means to an end. The wedding day was still 2 months away, but for me, the countdown to a different kind of reckoning had already begun. The next few weeks were a surreal performance, a carefully orchestrated dance of superficial normalcy. I smiled at Amelia's excited chatter about the wedding dress fittings, feigned interest in Brandon's latest artistic inspirations, and nodded along to their increasingly elaborate plans for their future, plans that always seemed to hinge on that $50,000. But beneath my placid exterior, a silent, methodical preparation was underway. My first step was a discreet call to my financial advisor, a man named Robert who had handled my accounts for over 2 decades and knew me well. I explained, in vague terms, that I needed to make a substantial gift to Amelia, but with an option for immediate revocation under specific, unstated circumstances. Robert, a savvy man who understood the nuances of family dynamics, didn't press for details. He suggested a cashier's check from a specific account, which, while appearing like a final payment, could be halted or invalidated almost instantly with a single phone call from me before it cleared. It was a perfectly legal, albeit unusual, arrangement that gave me the control I needed without raising any red flags for Amelia or Brandon. I also consulted briefly with my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, under the guise of updating my estate plan. I asked him hypothetically about the implications of reneging on a verbal financial promise, especially one made within a familial context. He confirmed what I suspected. Until the check was cashed and the funds irrevocably transferred, it was still my money. His legal advice reinforced my resolve, giving me a sense of security in my quiet plan. The wedding planning continued, each decision an opportunity for Amelia to subtly or not so subtly underscore her expectations. She insisted on a specific, incredibly expensive brand of champagne for the toast, citing class and tradition. Brandon, meanwhile, frequently dropped hints about the necessity of a larger, more modern studio space. "You know, Mr. Thorne," he'd say with a charming, earnest look, "an artist needs room to breathe, to create. It's an investment in future masterpieces, really." I would simply nod, a polite smile on my face, watching them both, seeing the wheels turn in their minds, envisioning their grand future funded by my generosity. They were so confident, so assured of their impending windfall. They never once considered that I might be aware of their true motives. They thought I was a simple, old-fashioned man, easily manipulated by a pretty face and a few well-placed compliments. Every interaction was a fresh sting, a new piece of evidence confirming their avarice. Amelia's conversations with her friends, overheard snippets from her phone calls when she thought I wasn't listening, often revolved around the wedding budget. "My dad's covering everything, of course," she'd boast, "and he's giving us a huge cash gift on top. We're set." The tone was always one of triumph, never gratitude. I felt like an unwitting participant in my own fleecing. I kept the physical check in a safe deposit box, a crisp $50,000 promising a future I knew was built on sand. Each day, as the wedding approached, the weight of that check grew heavier, not because of its monetary value but because of what it represented. A test, a turning point. I watched them, these two people, my daughter and her fiancé, planning their lives based on money they hadn't earned, money they believed was their right. They saw me as an ATM, a means to an end, and their arrogance grew with each passing day. They walked with a newfound swagger, their discussions increasingly focused on travel plans and art markets they would conquer, all thanks to Daddy's generosity. They had no idea that their elaborate charade was about to unravel, that the carefully laid trap was slowly, silently, snapping shut. The anticipation was a cold, quiet fire in my belly, a stark contrast to the festive chaos of wedding preparations surrounding me. Soon, very soon, they would learn that underestimating Marcus Thorne was a very costly mistake. The day of the wedding arrived, bright and unseasonably warm for late October in Evergreen Heights, a deceptive beauty that mirrored the tension in my heart. The sprawling gardens of the historic estate, where Amelia had chosen to hold her ceremony, were ablaze with autumn colors, a breathtaking backdrop for what was supposed to be a joyous occasion. I walked through the manicured lawns, greeting guests with practiced ease, a polite smile masking the storm brewing within me. My daughter Amelia was radiant. Her ivory gown, a confection of lace and silk, flowed around her as she moved, truly looking like a princess. She was beautiful, undeniably so. And as I saw her, a flicker of the old love, the pure, unconditional love, tried to break through my carefully constructed resolve. But then I remembered the overheard conversations, the casual dismissiveness, the calculating greed. The feeling hardened into something impenetrable. The ceremony began. The string quartet played a classical piece as the bridesmaids, dressed in flowing emerald gowns, processed down the aisle. Then it was my turn to escort Amelia. Her arm linked with mine, she leaned in and whispered, "Nervous, Daddy." Her voice was light, but I detected a hint of smugness, as if she knew the full extent of my generosity and was enjoying the moment of public adoration. I simply squeezed her hand and offered a faint smile. As we reached the altar, I handed her off to Brandon, who looked remarkably confident, a predatory gleam in his eye as he took Amelia's hand. He knows, I thought. He knows what he's getting, and he thinks he's won. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice calm and reverent. The vows were exchanged, traditional and heartfelt, until it was Amelia's turn to speak her personal vows to Brandon. She had insisted on writing her own, wanting them to be unique and meaningful. I braced myself, a premonition of what was to come chilling me to the bone. Amelia took a deep breath, her eyes sparkling, not with tears of joy, but with an unsettling glint of triumph. "Brandon, my love, today is the beginning of our incredible journey together," she began, her voice clear and carrying across the hushed crowd. "And I want to thank everyone who has supported us, who has believed in our dream. Especially I want to thank my father, Marcus Thorne." A murmur of approval rippled through the guests. This was it, I thought, the moment of gratitude. But then her tone shifted, becoming laced with a saccharine sweetness that made my skin crawl. "My father, a man of traditional values. He's always worked so hard, always preached the value of money, of saving, of being responsible. He's always been so careful, some might even say rigid. But thanks to his generosity, we finally have the freedom to truly spread our wings, to live life on our own terms, to not be beholden to anyone's old-fashioned ideas of success. We can finally pursue our art, our passions, without worrying about the mundane. It's truly liberating, isn't it, darling?" She turned to Brandon, who gave her a knowing smile, a subtle nod of complicity. A few snickers rippled through the younger guests, friends of Amelia and Brandon, who clearly understood the veiled insult. The older guests, my friends and colleagues, exchanged confused, uncomfortable glances. My face, I knew, remained impassive. Inside, however, a profound, icy calm had settled over me. Her words were a public humiliation, a deliberate jab, mocking my life's work, my values, my very character, all under the guise of a wedding vow. She wasn't thanking me. She was dismissing me, belittling me, announcing her emancipation from my old-fashioned influence, all while still relying on my money. It was a calculated, vicious insult designed to assert her independence and subtly remind everyone of her coming financial liberation, at my expense. As she finished, a smug smile played on her lips. She thought she had won. She thought she had cleverly delivered her parting shot, secured her financial future, and publicly elevated herself above my rigid influence. It was the moment. I reached into my inner jacket pocket, not to retrieve the check but my phone. With a single, almost imperceptible movement, I initiated the prearranged call to Robert, my financial advisor. He answered on the second ring. "Robert, it's Marcus. That $50,000 cashier's check for Amelia Thorne dated today? Yes. I need you to cancel it immediately. Stop payment. Make sure the funds are irrevocably returned to my primary account." His voice was professional, confirming the action. "Consider it done, Marcus. It will be as if it never existed." I disconnected the call, my thumb brushing the power button, plunging the phone screen into blackness. I then slowly, deliberately pulled out the carefully folded, crisp white paper from my pocket. It wasn't the cashier's check. It was a blank piece of paper, folded in the exact same way. I looked at Amelia, whose eyes met mine, a triumphant glint still in them. She expected to see hurt, perhaps anger. Instead, she saw a calm, almost serene expression. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, I tore the blank paper in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter silently to the ground beside my shoe. A silent message, understood by no one but me and soon her. The officiant then declared them husband and wife, and the crowd erupted in applause. Amelia, beaming, turned to me for a hug. I embraced her briefly, a perfunctory squeeze before stepping back. The reception flowed into the grand ballroom. The air was festive, but for me, it felt charged with an unspoken tension. I watched Amelia and Brandon, laughing, accepting congratulations, their faces alight with the glow of their perceived victory. They moved through the crowd, radiating a confidence that bordered on arrogance, clearly anticipating their big moment with the check. As the evening progressed, the speeches began. Brandon delivered a heartfelt, if somewhat self-congratulatory, toast. Then it was Amelia's turn. She raised her glass, her eyes scanning the room, finally landing on me, a challenging glint in their depths. "And finally," she announced, her voice ringing out, "I want to propose a toast to my wonderful father. Without his incredible generosity, none of this would be possible. And as a symbol of his unending support, he's given us a truly amazing gift, a gift that will allow us to start our new life together, completely free." She paused, her eyes fixed on me, a dramatic flourish. "Daddy," she prompted, extending her hand slightly, expecting me to present the $50,000 check, perhaps a grand reveal. The spotlight was on me. I remained seated at my table, a quiet smile on my face. "Amelia, darling," I said, my voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of warmth, "I believe I made it quite clear during your vows that some things are conditional, and certain words, certain attitudes have consequences." The color drained from her face. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of bewildered shock. Brandon, who had been standing proudly beside her, exchanged a confused glance with her. The room, which had been buzzing with polite chatter, fell into an uncomfortable silence. "What are you talking about, Daddy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The gift, the $50,000, where is it?" I shook my head slowly, deliberately. "There is no gift, Amelia, not anymore. That generosity, as you so casually put it, was revoked the moment you chose to publicly demean me, to mock my values, and to imply that my support was a cage you needed to escape. The check you were expecting, it has been canceled. The funds returned to my account. There is no $50,000 waiting for you." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Amelia's face, already pale, turned a ghastly white. Her jaw dropped. Her eyes widened, darting between me and Brandon, then around the room at the stunned faces of the guests. Brandon's confident smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated panic. "What?" he stammered, stepping forward, his voice rising in disbelief. "Mr. Thorne, you can't be serious. We were counting on that. This is our future." I met his gaze, my own eyes cold and unwavering. "Your future, Brandon, is now entirely in your own hands, and Amelia's. You wish to be free of my influence. Consider yourselves liberated, completely." Amelia let out a small, strangled gasp, a sound of utter devastation. She swayed on her feet, her hand flying to her mouth. The sheer audacity, the public nature of my announcement had completely blindsided her. The carefully constructed facade of her perfect wedding, her perfect life, crumbled around her in an instant. The silence in the ballroom was deafening, punctuated only by the nervous coughs of a few guests. Everyone was staring, their faces a mix of shock, embarrassment, and a dawning understanding. Amelia, finally finding her voice, let out a piercing shriek. "You did this to me, on my wedding day. You ruined everything." Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow, but of fury and utter humiliation. Brandon, meanwhile, had gone from panic to enraged. He stepped towards me, his fists clenched, his face contorted. "You manipulative old man, you can't do this." Before he could take another step, a few of my friends, sturdy, no-nonsense men, subtly positioned themselves between us, their expressions clear warnings. I simply held up a hand, a gesture of calm dismissal. "I believe I just did," I stated, my voice steady. "And the only one who ruined anything, Amelia, was you, by revealing your true colors for all to see. Your vows, your words, they were your choice. And so are the consequences." The rest of the evening was a blur of chaos. Amelia, hysterical, fled the ballroom, Brandon following close behind, shouting recriminations. Guests whispered furiously, some sympathetic to Amelia, many more looking at me with a mixture of shock and grudging respect. The fairytale wedding had dissolved into a public spectacle, a brutal lesson in entitlement and respect. As the last stunned guests departed, leaving behind a lavishly decorated hall now echoing with emptiness, I sat alone at my table, looking at the remnants of a wedding that had become a battlefield. The calm anger that had sustained me through the day slowly gave way to a profound, weary sadness. It was done. The trap had snapped shut, but the victory felt hollow, tinged with the bitterness of a shattered dream. My daughter had chosen money and disrespect over a genuine relationship, and I had chosen self-respect over being a perpetual wallet. The cost, however, was immense. The immediate fallout from the wedding disaster was swift and brutal. The next morning, my phone, usually quiet on a Sunday, rang off the hook with calls from Amelia, Brandon, and even some of my extended family members, all demanding explanations, all filled with anger and accusations. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages were a torrent of fury, tears, and threats. Amelia's voice, raw with indignation, shrieked about how I had destroyed her life, how I was a cruel, unforgiving monster who had humiliated her in front of everyone. Brandon's messages were equally venomous, laced with legal threats and demands for what was rightfully theirs. My sister, a well-meaning but often meddlesome woman, called to lecture me about family forgiveness and ruining Amelia's big day. I listened to them all, a strange calm settling over me. They simply didn't understand. They couldn't grasp that this wasn't about money for me. It was about respect, about dignity, about the crushing realization that my love had been systematically devalued. The wedding itself became a topic of scandal in Evergreen Heights. Whispers followed me in the grocery store, curious glances from neighbors. I met them all with an unwavering gaze, refusing to be shamed. Let them talk, I thought. The truth, ugly as it was now out. For Amelia and Brandon, the consequences were far more immediate and concrete. Without the $50,000, their grand plans for a new art studio, for expensive gallery leases, for a life of artistic freedom without mundane worries, evaporated. The deposits they had already placed, based on the assumption of my check, were lost. The initial reports I heard were that they canceled their honeymoon, arguing bitterly over finances. Their dreams, built on a foundation of my money, crumbled with startling speed. A few weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that Brandon's gallery owner, who had been aware of their expected windfall and had promised a prime exhibition spot, quietly retracted the offer. He was a shrewd businessman, and a public scene like that, a couple so clearly reliant on outside funds, wasn't good for his image. Brandon's artistic career, which was already tenuous, suffered a significant setback. Amelia, meanwhile, had to face the reality of her own limited funds. She had quit her part-time job a month before the wedding, convinced that the $50,000 would provide ample cushion. Now, without it, she was scrambling. The apartment I had helped her with, the one she considered too small and restricting, suddenly became her only stable asset. The irony was not lost on me. I didn't gloat, I didn't seek out details of their struggles. The information inevitably found its way to me through various channels. I saw pictures on social media, Amelia, looking drawn and angry, Brandon, his usual confident swagger replaced by a sullen resentment. Their relationship, once fueled by the promise of financial freedom, seemed to buckle under the weight of unexpected hardship. The liberation they had so eagerly sought had come at a heavy price, one they were now forced to pay. For my part, I slowly began to find a new kind of peace. The raw wound of betrayal began to heal, leaving behind a scar, but also a newfound clarity. I reevaluated my relationships, recognizing those who valued me for who I was, and those who only saw my resources. I spent more time with friends who had stood by me, quietly offering support. I reconnected with distant relatives who genuinely cared. I even took up painting again, a hobby I had abandoned years ago due to my demanding work schedule and my focus on Amelia's needs. The canvas became a quiet space for reflection, a place to process the complex emotions of what had transpired. I learned that true generosity is about giving with love, not about being taken advantage of. And true respect is earned, not demanded. The incident at the wedding, painful as it was, had forced me to draw a firm boundary, to reclaim my self-worth. It was a harsh lesson, but one that ultimately freed me. Amelia and Brandon eventually moved away from Evergreen Heights, seeking a fresh start elsewhere. I heard they were living in a smaller city, both working entry-level jobs, trying to rebuild their lives from scratch. I never heard from them again directly, not after the initial wave of angry messages, and I made no attempt to reach out. Perhaps one day, with time and maturity, Amelia might understand the true cost of her choices, the value of the love she discarded. Perhaps she would learn that genuine freedom comes from self-reliance and gratitude, not from exploiting the kindness of others. For me, Marcus Thorne, the man who was once just a wallet, I finally found a profound sense of peace. I had given my daughter everything, and in return I had received a bitter lesson in human nature. But in setting her free from my old-fashioned ideas, I had, in turn, set myself free from a lifetime of being taken for granted. And that, I realized, was a priceless form of karma. The autumn leaves continued to fall in Evergreen Heights, but now the air no longer felt cold with dread. It felt crisp, clean, and full of the promise of a quiet, dignified future. The autumn leaves continued to fall in Evergreen Heights, but now the air no longer felt cold with dread. It felt crisp, clean, and full of the promise of a quiet, dignified future. That immediate aftermath, however, was anything but quiet. The phone calls, as I'd expected, intensified for a few days, a relentless barrage of outrage and accusations, each one a fresh reminder of the chasm that had opened between me and my daughter. I continued to ignore them, listening to the voicemails later, if at all. Amelia's messages would start with a choked sob, then escalate into furious yelling, calling me heartless and a monster. Brandon's were more calculated, threatening legal action for what he deemed a breach of promise, a promise that, as Mr. Harrison had confirmed, had never truly been legally binding. My sister, Clara, called incessantly, her voice tinged with a blend of concern and judgment. "Marcus, you've ruined her life. How could you do such a thing to your own daughter on her wedding day, no less?" She couldn't see past the spectacle, couldn't understand the years of quiet erosion that had led to that moment. I found myself simply deleting her messages, too weary to engage in an argument that would lead nowhere. I knew her heart was in the right place, but her mind was clouded by traditional family expectations and a complete lack of insight into Amelia's true character. The whispers in Evergreen Heights, as predicted, followed me. At the coffee shop, I'd catch hushed conversations ceasing abruptly as I entered. In the grocery aisle, I'd feel eyes on my back, the weight of judgment from some, curiosity from others. A few acquaintances offered hesitant condolences, unsure of what side to take. "Marcus, I'm so sorry about everything," one woman from my book club stammered, her gaze shifting uncomfortably. I simply nodded, maintaining a calm, almost serene expression. I had made my choice, and I would live with its public repercussions. My conscience was clear. I had acted not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated need for self-preservation and dignity. The first few weeks were an emotional tightrope walk. There were moments, especially in the quiet solitude of my home, when the image of Amelia's face, pale and stricken, would flash in my mind, bringing with it a pang of sorrow. That was the face of the little girl I had loved fiercely, the one I had wanted to protect. But then, almost immediately, her voice would echo, cold and cynical, "Fool." The words from her wedding vows, mocking my traditional values, her desire to be free of old-fashioned ideas, would return with brutal clarity, hardening my resolve once more. The daughter I had mourned was not the one who stood before me at the altar, but an illusion I had cherished for far too long. The reports of Amelia and Brandon's immediate struggles filtered back to me, primarily through Robert, my financial advisor, who had heard snippets from mutual acquaintances in the business community, and from a few loyal friends who felt I deserved to know. Their honeymoon, a lavish 2-week trip to the Amalfi Coast that I had unknowingly been expected to fund, was indeed canceled. The travel agency, after a heated argument with Brandon, informed them that the significant non-refundable deposits they had paid could not be retrieved. That was perhaps the first of many financial dominoes to fall. The studio space Brandon had been so confident about securing, the one that required a substantial lease payment and renovation budget, also slipped through their fingers. The landlord, a meticulous man, had pulled their application when he heard the rumors from the wedding. He preferred stable tenants, not those whose finances seemed built on shifting sand. This meant Brandon was back to painting in his cramped apartment, his frustration growing with each passing day. Amelia, who had indeed quit her part-time marketing job a month before the wedding, found herself in a precarious position. She had envisioned a life where she could pursue her passions without the drudgery of a regular paycheck. Now, the mundane reality she so disdained crashed down on her. The apartment I had helped her purchase with a down payment years ago, once a symbol of her independence, now felt like a gilded cage. She had complained about its size, its location, its lack of artistic flair. Now it was her only refuge, a constant reminder of the safety net I had provided, a net she had so eagerly tried to sever. Their relationship, which I had always suspected was transactional at its core, began to fray visibly. The initial glow of newlywed bliss was quickly replaced by tension and resentment. Overheard conversations, recounted by acquaintances, spoke of bitter arguments in public, whispered accusations of who was more to blame for their predicament. Brandon, feeling the pressure of his stagnating artistic career, grew increasingly irritable, lashing out at Amelia for her perceived arrogance and for pushing him into a situation where they had relied so heavily on my funds. Amelia, in turn, blamed him for not being strategic enough, for not pushing me harder, for not foreseeing my cruelty. It was a vicious cycle of blame, and I watched from a distance as the foundation they had built on my supposed generosity crumbled. One afternoon, several weeks after the wedding, I received an unexpected visit from Mr. Harrison, my lawyer. He looked somewhat uncomfortable, shifting in his seat in my study. "Marcus," he began, "Amelia and Brandon have initiated legal proceedings. They are claiming breach of verbal contract, asserting that you promised the $50,000 as an unconditional gift and that its revocation has caused them significant financial harm and emotional distress." I simply raised an eyebrow. "And what is your professional opinion, Mr. Harrison?" He chuckled, a dry, almost cynical sound. "My professional opinion, Marcus, is that they have no leg to stand on. A verbal promise for a gift, especially under these circumstances, is virtually unenforceable. Furthermore, your actions, while certainly dramatic, were entirely within your legal rights. I have already drafted a strong response, highlighting the conditional nature of your prior generosity and the very public reasons for your change of heart. I believe this will be swiftly dismissed. He paused, looking at me intently. They also attempted to claim a stake in the Evergreen Heights property where the wedding took place, alleging that because it was used for their ceremony, they had some implicit rights. That, of course, is absurd. It's a commercial venue, not your property, and even if it were, their claim is baseless. I felt a flicker of something akin to pity quickly extinguished. Their desperation was palpable, but it only served to underscore their continued refusal to take responsibility. They weren't seeking justice. They were seeking a handout, still believing they were entitled to my resources, even after everything. The legal challenge proved to be a fleeting annoyance, just as Mr. Harrison predicted. Their lawsuit was indeed dismissed, with a stern warning from the judge about frivolous claims. The legal fees, however, became another unexpected burden for them, further depleting their non-existent savings. It was a small but significant detail that I learned through Mr. Harrison's follow-up call, another nail in the coffin of their financial hubris. This setback, I heard, pushed Brandon into a deeper spiral of frustration. His artistic output, once prolific but uninspired, dwindled to nothing. He couldn't afford new materials, and the constant stress, the arguments with Amelia, stifled any creative spark he might have possessed. The small local galleries that had once shown a mild interest in his work now politely declined his inquiries. He had become persona non grata, not just for the wedding scandal, but for his increasing reputation as a difficult, entitled, and financially unstable individual. The art world, despite its bohemian facade, was still a business, and no one wanted to associate with someone who might bring drama or financial uncertainty. Amelia, meanwhile, took a job waiting tables at a small diner on the outskirts of Evergreen Heights. The irony was bitter. My daughter, who had once prided herself on her refined tastes and her disdain for anything mundane, was now serving coffee and greasy breakfasts. I never went to that diner, of course, but the news reached me. Her friends, the ones who had snickered at my old-fashioned values during her vows, slowly drifted away. They were fair-weather friends, drawn by Amelia's perceived status and the promise of lavish parties. Without my financial backing, Amelia's social currency plummeted. She was no longer the hostess with the mostest, the one with the designer clothes and the plans for exotic travel. She was just another struggling young woman, burdened by debt and a failing marriage. The liberation she had so gleefully anticipated had truly arrived, but it was a liberation into hardship, not freedom. I, on the other hand, began to experience a profound sense of lightness. The weight I had carried for years, the unspoken burden of being Amelia's provider, the quiet despair of being taken for granted, had been lifted. My architectural firm, which had often felt like a means to an end, specifically, Amelia's endless financial needs, suddenly became a source of renewed passion. I found myself approaching new projects with a vigor I hadn't felt in years. I mentored a bright young architect, a recent graduate named David, who reminded me of myself in my younger days, ambitious, humble, and genuinely passionate about design. He listened to my advice, absorbed my experience, and brought fresh ideas to the table, creating a truly symbiotic relationship that was deeply satisfying. This genuine connection, built on mutual respect, was a stark contrast to the one I had shared with Amelia and Brandon. I also rediscovered old hobbies. The painting, which I had started again in the immediate aftermath of the wedding, became a regular, cherished activity. My canvases were filled with vibrant landscapes, abstract expressions of my newfound emotional freedom. I wasn't particularly good, but the act of creating, of losing myself in color and form, was incredibly therapeutic. It was a quiet rebellion against the life of rigid financial provisioning that Amelia had so mocked. I also reconnected with my true friends, the ones who had offered quiet support, not judgment. We had long dinners, played rounds of golf, and simply enjoyed each other's company, free from the shadow of my family drama. One evening, my oldest friend, Charles, raised a glass to me. "Marcus," he said, his eyes kind, "you did the right thing. It took courage, but you did it, and you look lighter, happier." His words resonated deeply. I was happier. The peace I had found wasn't a triumphant, vengeful joy, but a quiet, enduring contentment. It was the peace of knowing I had stood up for myself, that I had drawn a line in the sand, and that I would no longer allow myself to be treated as merely a resource to be exploited. A little over a year after the wedding, I received news that Amelia and Brandon had separated. It came from Clara, my sister, who still occasionally left me voicemails, though they were now less accusatory and more mournful. "Marcus," her voice was thin, "Amelia and Brandon, they've split. It was very messy. He apparently left her for another artist, someone with a wealthy patron. Amelia is heartbroken, completely devastated. She's selling the apartment, she can't afford it anymore, and she's moving to a different state, starting over with nothing." Clara ended the message with a plea. "She needs her father, Marcus. She needs you." I listened to the message, and for a moment the old instincts tugged at me. The desire to fix things, to rescue my daughter from distress, was deeply ingrained. But I had learned my lesson. The Amelia she was describing wasn't the little girl twirling in her princess dress. She was a woman facing the natural consequences of her own actions and choices. Her heartbreak, while real, was not solely my doing. It was the culmination of years of entitlement, of seeing relationships as transactional, of believing the world owed her everything. Brandon, too, had received his own brand of karma. His pursuit of a wealthy patron, abandoning Amelia, was perfectly in character. He would continue to seek out those who could provide for him, never truly developing his own artistic voice or self-sufficiency. It was a pattern, a cycle of dependency that would likely repeat itself until he was forced to truly reckon with himself. I deleted Clara's message, a soft click that felt surprisingly final. I didn't feel a surge of vindication, nor a desire to offer assistance. There was just a quiet understanding. My role as the great provider, the wallet, was truly over. Amelia would have to learn to stand on her own 2 feet, to build a life based on her own efforts and choices, not on the expectation of endless handouts. Perhaps, in time, this harsh reality would teach her the value of hard work, humility, and genuine gratitude. Perhaps she would finally understand that real love and respect could not be bought or demanded, only earned. I decided not to reach out, not to intervene. My journey of fatherhood with Amelia had reached its end, a bittersweet conclusion to a story that had begun with such boundless hope and unconditional love. The scar on my heart remained, a reminder of the pain, but also of the strength I had found in reclaiming my own worth. I found myself looking forward, not back. My firm was thriving, David was proving to be an exceptional mentee, and my painting studio in the spare room was filled with new canvases, new colors, new visions. I even started volunteering at a local community center, helping to design a new youth arts program. It was fulfilling work, helping young people discover their potential, watching them create with genuine passion, without the corrupting influence of entitlement. I spent my days surrounded by people who valued my experience, my wisdom, and my kindness, not just my bank balance. The autumn leaves in Evergreen Heights now fell with a gentle rustle, no longer carrying the chill of betrayal but the whisper of a quiet, hard-won peace. My future, once filled with the dread of a ticking bomb, was now open, serene, and truly my own. I had given everything I had to Amelia, and in the end her choices had given me back myself. And that, I realized, was the most profound form of justice I could ever hope for. My story, Marcus Thorne's story, was one of quiet resilience, of elegant justice, and of finally learning that self-respect is a treasure far more valuable than any amount of money. The profound peace I had found wasn't a triumphant, vengeful joy, but a quiet, enduring contentment. It was the peace of knowing I had stood up for myself, that I had drawn a line in the sand, and that I would no longer allow myself to be treated as merely a resource to be exploited. A little over a year after the wedding, I received news that Amelia and Brandon had separated. It came from Clara, my sister, who still occasionally left me voicemails, though they were now less accusatory and more mournful. Marcus, her voice was thin. Amelia and Brandon, they've split. It was very messy. He apparently left her for another artist, someone with a wealthy patron. Amelia is heartbroken, completely devastated. She's selling the apartment, she can't afford it anymore, and she's moving to a different state, starting over with nothing. Clara ended the message with a plea. She needs her father, Marcus. She needs you. I listened to the message, and for a moment the old instincts tugged at me. The desire to fix things, to rescue my daughter from distress, was deeply ingrained. But I had learned my lesson. The Amelia she was describing wasn't the little girl twirling in her princess dress. She was a woman facing the natural consequences of her own actions and choices. Her heartbreak, while real, was not solely my doing. It was the culmination of years of entitlement, of seeing relationships as transactional, of believing the world owed her everything. Brandon, too, had received his own brand of karma. His pursuit of a wealthy patron, abandoning Amelia, was perfectly in character. He would continue to seek out those who could provide for him, never truly developing his own artistic voice or self-sufficiency. It was a pattern, a cycle of dependency that would likely repeat itself until he was forced to truly reckon with himself. I deleted Clara's message, a soft click that felt surprisingly final. I didn't feel a surge of vindication, nor a desire to offer assistance. There was just a quiet understanding. My role as the great provider, the wallet, was truly over. Amelia would have to learn to stand on her own 2 feet, to build a life based on her own efforts and choices, not on the expectation of endless handouts. Perhaps in time, this harsh reality would teach her the value of hard work, humility, and genuine gratitude. Perhaps she would finally understand that real love and respect could not be bought or demanded, only earned. I decided not to reach out, not to intervene. My journey of fatherhood with Amelia had reached its end, a bittersweet conclusion to a story that had begun with such boundless hope and unconditional love. The scar on my heart remained, a reminder of the pain, but also of the strength I had found in reclaiming my own worth. I found myself looking forward, not back. My firm was thriving, David was proving to be an exceptional mentee, and my painting studio in the spare room was filled with new canvases, new colors, new visions. I even started volunteering at a local community center, helping to design a new youth arts program. It was fulfilling work, helping young people discover their potential, watching them create with genuine passion, without the corrupting influence of entitlement. I spent my days surrounded by people who valued my experience, my wisdom, and my kindness, not just my bank balance. The autumn leaves in Evergreen Heights now fell with a gentle rustle, no longer carrying the chill of betrayal but the whisper of a quiet, hard-won peace. My future, once filled with the dread of a ticking bomb, was now open, serene, and truly my own. I had given everything I had to Amelia, and in the end her choices had given me back myself. And that, I realized, was the most profound form of justice I could ever hope for. My story, Marcus Thorne's story, was one of quiet resilience, of elegant justice, and of finally learning that self-respect is a treasure far more valuable than any amount of money. The years that followed became a testament to that hard-won peace. My architectural firm, Thorne and Associates, flourished under my renewed focus. David, my young mentee, grew into a talented partner, bringing fresh perspectives while respecting the foundational values I had instilled. We worked on projects that were not only financially rewarding, but also creatively fulfilling, designing sustainable urban spaces and community-focused buildings that truly made a difference. I found immense satisfaction in mentoring David, watching him navigate the complexities of the profession with an earnestness Amelia had never possessed. He was eager to learn, humble in his ambition, and genuinely excited by the craft of building, not just the financial rewards. Our relationship was a balm to the wound Amelia had left, a demonstration that true connection was possible based on mutual respect and shared passion. My painting hobby evolved into something more serious. I joined a local art group where I found camaraderie with other amateur artists who painted for the sheer joy of it. We critiqued each other's work kindly, celebrated small victories, and shared stories of our lives. It was a world away from the pretentious art circles Amelia and Brandon had aspired to, a place of genuine creativity and support. My canvases became bolder, my colors more vibrant, reflecting the inner freedom I now felt. I even had a small exhibition at a community gallery, selling a few pieces, not for profit, but for the validation of knowing my art resonated with others. It was a quiet triumph, a personal rebellion against the notion that art was only for the gifted and the supported. The volunteer work at the youth arts program became a cornerstone of my week. I loved seeing the raw talent and unbridled enthusiasm of the children, helping them discover their artistic voices. I made sure to emphasize the importance of perseverance, of genuine effort, and of finding joy in the creative process itself, rather than external validation or financial gain. I saw glimpses of the pure, untainted love for creation that Brandon had seemingly lost, and it reminded me of the true purpose of art. These children, with their humble beginnings, were far richer in spirit than Amelia and Brandon had ever been. Life in Evergreen Heights continued its comfortable rhythm, but my place within it had subtly shifted. The whispers eventually died down, replaced by a quiet respect. My friends and colleagues, those who had seen the subtle abuse I had endured for years, silently commended my courage. Some even confessed similar struggles with entitled family members, finding strength in my story. I found a deeper connection with these individuals, a shared understanding of the silent battles many fought within their own families. I learned to discern true affection from calculated interest, genuine connection from mere transaction. My social circle became smaller, perhaps, but infinitely more authentic. As for Amelia, the news of her life came in sporadic, often filtered snippets. Clara, my sister, continued to call sometimes, her voice now devoid of judgment, replaced by genuine concern for her niece. Amelia's new life in a different state hadn't been the fresh start she'd envisioned. She struggled to find stable employment, her previous part-time marketing experience not translating well in a new, competitive market without strong local connections. The small apartment she rented was a stark contrast to the one she had sold, a constant reminder of the comfortable life she had once taken for granted. Her disdain for mundane jobs forced her into a series of unsatisfying roles, none of which she held for long. She blamed the economy, she blamed her former husband, and sometimes, Clara hinted, she still blamed me. But the blame was no longer a weapon against me. It was a burden she carried herself, festering in her own heart. Brandon's trajectory was equally predictable. His relationship with the wealthy patron, an older woman with a penchant for collecting young artists, eventually dissolved. He had repeated his pattern, taking advantage of her generosity, making grandiose promises, and eventually showing his true colors. A lack of genuine talent coupled with an overwhelming sense of entitlement. He found himself cast adrift once more, his artistic career remaining perpetually on the brink, never quite achieving the breakthrough he felt he deserved. He drifted from city to city, always seeking a new benefactor, a new source of funds, never truly finding success because he never learned to value hard work or to truly create for creation's sake. The art world, as I had always known, was a brutal place for those without genuine passion or discipline. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost 5 years after the infamous wedding, I was at a cafe in a neighboring town, meeting with a client. As I waited for my coffee, I saw her, Amelia. She was older now, her face etched with lines of worry I hadn't seen before. She was working as a barista, her uniform a simple apron over practical clothes. She looked tired, her movements mechanical, far from the radiant, entitled princess who had walked down the aisle. Our eyes met across the crowded cafe. For a split second, recognition flashed in her eyes, followed by a flicker of surprise, then something I couldn't quite decipher, perhaps embarrassment, perhaps a hint of the old resentment. But there was no triumph, no challenging glint, only a quiet, weary resignation. I gave her a polite, almost imperceptible nod, a simple acknowledgement of a shared past, but nothing more. My face remained calm, serene. I felt no anger, no vindication. Only a quiet, profound sense of melancholy for the path she had chosen, and a deeper appreciation for the path I had forged for myself. She quickly turned away, busying herself with an order, her back to me. The moment passed, unacknowledged by anyone else in the bustling cafe. I didn't approach her, didn't offer any words, didn't extend an olive branch. The bridge between us had long been burned, and it was her choice to light the fire. My peace was too precious to risk. Her situation, while perhaps difficult, was her own making, her own lesson to learn. I knew that true growth often came from hardship, and perhaps, just perhaps, this was her journey towards self-sufficiency and genuine humility. It was a journey I could no longer be a part of, not in the way she had once expected. As I drank my coffee, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. I had lost a daughter, or rather, the illusion of one. But I had gained so much more: self-respect, inner strength, and a clear understanding of what truly mattered in life. I realized that my most important legacy would not be the money I accumulated, nor even the buildings I designed, but the integrity with which I lived my life. The choice I had made on that fateful wedding day was not an act of cruelty, but an act of profound self-love, a necessary severance that allowed me to finally breathe. My heart, once heavy with unspoken burdens, now felt light, free. The scar remained, a faint reminder of a painful past, but it was no longer a source of anguish. It was a mark of resilience, a symbol of a man who had faced betrayal and emerged whole. The autumn leaves continued to fall in Evergreen Heights, and in the neighboring towns, a gentle, beautiful cycle of life continued. I was Marcus Thorne, a man who had once been a wallet, but who had ultimately found his true value, not in what he could give, but in who he truly was. And that, in its quiet, unwavering truth, was the most satisfying ending to my story of elegant justice.